leave our speakers on stage during their presentations or discussions, and we will put it to them then. You can also do the same in the room. So I would like to do a little test just to make sure everyone knows how this works. There's two ways of doing it. Either get the Reuters Events app out, if you've already done that, or get onto slido.com, as it shows over there. Use the hashtag Reuters Momentum to see how many of you are getting it working. Once we've taken the polls down, there's an option on there so you can actually send in the Q&A. So don't worry, it all should make a lot of sense. If it doesn't, come and chat to one of us in the Reuters Events team, and we're going to be more than happy to help you get that working through the next 2 days. But making things as interactive as possible isn't just about putting questions to our speakers, I think. If I could give you one bit of advice to get the most out of the next 2 days, is to make sure you really take the opportunity to speak to a new person in every single networking break. When we were building Reuters Momentum, we spoke to a lot of technologists, many of you who have joined us in the room today, and time again, we heard the same thing from people. People wanted an opportunity to get out of those day-to-day silos that we often find ourselves in and have the chance to meet, share ideas, and collaborate with people outside of our typical industries. So this event has been designed with that in mind. On stage, you'll hear from some incredibly experienced technologists from a wide range of industries, and the room has been designed to do exactly the same thing. So please take that opportunity, now that you're here, to get some fresh perspectives from your peers that you often don't get the time to really interact with and share some good networking time with on that daily basis. The Reuters Events team are here to help over the next 2 days. You'll see us with our badges on. We're a friendly bunch, so if you need any help, please do come and talk to us. And with that, I'd like to get onto the good stuff, and I'd like to hand over to our first speaker. Would you please welcome to the stage the Chief Information Officer at Thomson Reuters, Sarah Wilkinson.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. It's absolutely fantastic to see such a broad group of technologists in real life. It's fantastic. And obviously the thousands of people who are joining us on the webcast too. We've got a really exciting couple of days ahead. Really looking forward to the conversation, to the connections, and to learning from each other. So thank you very much for being here, for making the journey, for those of you who are in the room, for giving us your time and your intention, and for engaging in some of the really, really important topics that we're going to be talking about. I think I speak for all of you, as well as myself, when I say that what inspires me about working in this field, working in technology, is the extraordinary potential of technology to improve lives, to enable us to do business, to serve citizens in ever more powerful and effective ways, but also in ways that make the world a safer, more equitable, more connected place. The growth in technical capability that we're witnessing today, alongside the forces of globalization, mean that our organizations are more connected to the outside world in more complex ways than ever before, with ever deeper supply chains. So much of what we do affects people who aren't directly involved in our companies. Perhaps obviously most prominently through carbon emissions, but also in a ton of other ways, obviously, including the effects on labor markets, on our suppliers themselves, the standards that we might set in our own marketplaces, whether explicitly or implicitly. So this continued growth in externalities requires, I think, from an ethical and moral perspective, for us to be deeply mindful of the impact that our businesses have on that external world. And since the impact of our business on the world changes, because the external world changes continuously, I do believe that, in fact, the only way to make sure our businesses are sustainable in the long term is to be deeply concerned about this. I do think that what all of us and the organizations that we work for understand more than ever now is the need to maintain our social license. And when I say social license, What I mean is the belief among our collective stakeholders, our customers, our employees, our suppliers, our shareholders, or our communities, that the way in which we are doing business is fair, is appropriate, and is deserving of trust. And on that point of trust, I just want to make one point that I think is critical, I think. The focus must not be on being trusted, right? This is not a marketing activity. The focus of our efforts must be on being trustworthy. Much of what we're going to hear from our speakers for the next 2 days is about how we, as the technology leaders in our organizations, can help ensure that the way we operate is deserving of trust, because it's open, because it's responsible in terms of environmental and social impact, because it's safe in the way it cares for the people who uses the tech, because it's cyber secure, because it's oriented around the complex myriad needs of all our stakeholders. And getting this right is hard. I don't need to tell you guys that. Some of the actions we take, of course, are kind of clear and measurable, but many are not. And we are often trading off complex issues associated with environmental, social, governance responsibilities, and with these myriad stakeholder needs and interests. And often there's a kind of clear difference in economic interests between short-term shareholder value and managing this long-term impact of these externalities. But I have good news. And the good news is that over the next couple of days, we are going to have some really, really rich conversations about these challenges. And we're going to hear from some of the absolute experts in their fields and people who have really thought about these things in some depth. And just to whet your appetite, we're going to hear the latest thinking about how we leverage technology to achieve net zero faster, including the latest thinking on circular resource management. We're going to hear from Pure Storage around how we can address the sustainability issues that are particularly arising from exponential data growth. We're going to hear from CBRE about how we can design workplaces for the hybrid modern workplace models of today, and how we can create really equitable experiences for workers, whether they're remote or hybrid or in the building, as well as obviously reducing the carbon emissions of our physical estates in themselves. We're going to talk about online communities, how you can build community around an app such as Strava. We're going to look at some really fascinating research from the Pew Research Center tomorrow. They've spent nearly 3 decades now studying the rise of the internet and the impact of digital technology on people's lives, and their research is absolutely fantastic. We're going to look at opportunities associated with the metaverse, with Bitcoin. We're going to look at Web3 innovations in healthcare and in UNICEF's extraordinary work. We're going to hear how Change.org has empowered activism. We're going to look at, I think in various conversations, how technology can be the engine of greater accessibility and inclusion. And we're going to look in particular at some examples of how that's been achieved in fintech. We're going to take a cold, hard look at the reality of cyber risk and the extent to which we can protect ourselves from an ever-complex set of threat vectors. And on top of that, we're going to hear from a number of truly inspiring CIOs and one Texas city mayor about how they are leading their organizations and their communities through this period of massive opportunity, but massive complexity. And by the time we finish tomorrow, you will be wiser, you will be better networked and connected, and I hope you will be very inspired to go back from Austin and tackle these challenges that we're going to be talking about within your organizations and communities with renewed vigor and renewed insight. So have a fabulous couple of days. Enjoy the conference. Thank you.
fair, appropriate, and deserving of trust. Thank you, Sarah. That was powerful. And hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Keys. I'm a strategic director at Reuters Events and manage our tech, marketing, and customer experience portfolio events. It's my pleasure to be here today to welcome to the stage some of the world's most inspirational technologists and leaders. I'll be here to guide you through the day, so please feel free to come to me with any questions or concerns. But for now, we have our first panel discussion, Harnessing Technology for Positive Human Impact. Please welcome to the stage Sabina Ewing from Abbott, Sarah Wilkinson, back to the stage from Thomson Reuters, Casey Rotter from UNICEF NextGen, and our moderator, Mary Elizabeth Poiret from EY. This session is sponsored by our global technology partner, EY.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Mary Elizabeth Poiret. I am our Global Chief Technology Officer, the Deputy, and it is wonderful to be here with you all today. My role in our organization is leading a team of global technologists, really working to build long-term value for our clients through strategic platforms, products, and solutions. As you heard, today's panel is all about creating positive human impact with technology. So let's get started by introducing our panelists. Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Sarah Wilkinson. I'm CIO at Reuters. I've had a varied career, 23 years in investment banking, 7 years in government, running the Home Office technology in the UK, and then the NHS technology in the UK. And absolutely delighted to be here today. Thank you.
So Sabina Ewing, I'm delighted to join you today, representing Abbott. And as many know Abbott from our response relative to COVID, I'll just simply share that I am proud every day to join the 113,000 colleagues in over 160 countries that touch and deliver and drive to products, technologies that really impact over 1 billion people on the planet every year. And so I've been in IT for over 25 years, having spent the last 15 years in life sciences because of the mission of helping people live healthier, longer lives.
Welcome. Casey?
Hi, happy to be here. I'm Casey Rotter. I'm the founder and global lead for UNICEF Next Generation, which is a fundraising incubator and thought leadership platform within UNICEF that engages people between the ages of 21 through 45 in our work. In diverse industries, we bring together the tech leaders to help us do even more good for children. Very happy to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. Sabina, let's start with you. You hit on the fact that technology, certainly over this period that we witnessed through the pandemic, it had to be accelerated, right? It had to be accelerated for good. And it can enable unprecedented access, but it doesn't come without its complications. How can you ensure that as we move through technology in the healthcare area, that it's a force for good?
So first off, I would say that it starts with intentionality. As you talked about the accessibility, one of our focus areas is how do we democratize and empower people? I often describe the pandemic as a digital defibrillator, because if you were not on your digital journey, you got a jolt through the pandemic. And as a function of that, it's extraordinarily important that everyone is intentional about how are we going to not only utilize the latest and greatest technologies to bring that to bear relative to healthcare, but also how we democratize. How do we make it accessible? How do we empower and put it in the hands, not only of our customers, healthcare providers, but also patients? So I think about instances where, for instance, with our continuous glucose monitoring capability, we've made sure that we make it accessible and affordable. We have made multiple versions of it, and we haven't changed the price. So it's also about thinking of how do you touch so many people. Most people, since we're sitting here in the United States, almost half the population of the US is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. So recognizing that over half a million people have diabetes, and it's forecasted to be over 700 million by 2045. So when you go after the big things that matter in public health around the planet, you want to make sure that you're thinking about accessibility and affordability.
Absolutely. Well said. Sarah, Thomson Reuters can really reach out to billions of people within seconds. And you talked about in your opening about the ability to be trustworthy. How do you go about making sure that you're building trust as you reach out?
Well, it's a big question. I mean, I think there's many facets to kind of what we might traditionally have called the customer trust functions in big organizations. Certainly, we think about it a lot more than responding to incidents, which I think was the previous focus of a lot of customer trust functions. And of course, the team are absolutely critical in that still. So they stay very tightly in touch with all our customers if anything happens, which is bumpy. But we're extending it way beyond that now. And the important thing for us is that we build trust on a continuous basis with customers. So we know what customers want of the products and where they have concerns and what things they would like to see addressed or improved. And we seek to kind of constantly stay in touch with them and tell them when those things are being shifted in products and give them heads up, get them involved early in projects, in user groups, etc. The other thing I think that's important about customer trust today is that we need a constant stream of signals from our customers, from the market, about what we can do that will improve trust, and obviously anything that we're doing that is degrading trust in any way. And so I think trust functions in organizations are being increasingly thoughtful about how they get data back to the organization, about how the market experiences factors related to trust. So I think it's increasingly sort of big focus area. It's becoming more of a discipline, if you like, and more of a sort of deliberate thought process, this whole business of trust, as opposed to simply an uncontrollable side effect of work. So.
Absolutely, and it's tough to build. We often talk about that to build trust, you have to make a lot of deposits, and one withdrawal can wipe it out.
That's absolutely right.
Right, and so it can be a major.
Yeah, and
piece.
a lot of it's about the way in which you handle those incidents, obviously, and seeking to be absolutely honest and straight up with people when you have issues. That can be that actually can build trust. Weirdly, if people know that when there are difficulties, that there will be a very direct and open conversation about it, that can drive greater trust and allow you almost to get through more difficulties going forward with your customers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Casey, let's talk about next-gen leadership. You have a presence in the U.S., in Thailand, Italy, Vietnam, and the U.K., and last week I understand you launched in Germany. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
How does technology enable next-gen to advocate for children worldwide?
Thanks. So technology obviously allows us to convene and meet with our members. It kept us really going to have a community across borders during COVID. It was ever more important. We launched our first global board. We started in the US originally, and then we scaled to many countries, but we also have a global board that we launched in January. And so we have members from Dubai to Australia to South Korea, Europe, and so with our global board convening, the time zones aren't the most ideal, especially I live in Los Angeles. I didn't figure that out when I took this global role. Should have done that already, but we convene obviously, and technology allows us to do that, but it also allows our members to amplify our work in really interesting ways. And the role that our members have in, a lot of our members are tech leaders and emerging leaders in the tech space. And so what's really exciting is the way that they keep a legacy organization like UNICEF ahead of the digital curve and really challenge us. I'm sure there are a lot of people here that are surprised that UNICEF is talking about innovation and technology. We're a 75-year-old organization, but I would actually say we're leading in tech and innovation when it comes to social good. One of the things that I think is the most important and what actually attracts our members to us is the work that we're doing and how they can kind of help us do that. I'll be speaking later this afternoon with one of our next-gen members who's a leader in crypto. People are probably surprised to find that UNICEF has a venture fund, a VC fund, and a crypto fund, which we'll be speaking about in a case study later today. But Sean Rowland, one of our next-gen leaders, has really helped us kind of push us and champion us in that work. And then one of the things I think is the most exciting for me is how we're helping to close the digital divide. 1.2 billion children around the world do not have access to the internet. And so I think we really need to start there. 1.2 billion children do not have access to the internet at home. And nearly half of the world's schools are not online. So if we think about that, I don't know how many of you have children, but imagine the last 3 years with schools shut down, what are those 1.2 billion children doing and at home to continue their learning? And so that's where UNICEF comes in. We launched a partnership with the Telecommunications Union, which is the United Nations specialized agency for information and technology. And we launched a partnership called GIGA. And so we're mapping all the schools in the world to the internet. Not everybody knows how many schools there even are. We estimate 6 to 7 million. And we're connecting those schools to the internet and working with different partners in order to make that happen so that everyone has access to information, opportunity, and choice.
That's amazing. Thank you. Let's shift and talk a little bit about emerging tech. I think it's great that, a legacy organization like UNICEF can really get on the forefront of that, and hopefully more children will have access to emerging tech. Sabina, as we talk about attracting talent in the emerging tech space, how do you think about that at Abbott? What are you thinking about?
So first and foremost, I think we attract starting on our purpose and our mission. That's the foray into it. But also recognizing that in order for us to continue to be innovative after 133 years of being in business, it's important for us to use the latest and greatest capabilities. And so as we look at our talent and those that are in the organization, because it's not only about attracting people into the organization, it's about how do you harness the power of the people that you currently have. And so as a function of that, we're looking at not only for the purpose of our business, where we are, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it is in terms of what does the metaverse look like for us in terms of education for healthcare providers. It's about AR, VR. It's about how do you have the right level of smart sensors in terms of your equipment within your manufacturing processes. It's a function of how are you looking at all dimensions, if you will, of what I would say represents digital for me. So most people use the word digital,
Yes.
and it means a lot of different things. But for me, it represents how do you bring to bear the latest and greatest technologies to substantially drive improvements in your organization, to substantially drive, if you will, performance. And so in attracting talent, it's a function of the type of work that they're going to do. And we're on this journey around modernization. So that's another vector of, if you will, of really helping not only the people that are coming into the organization, but also the people who are already there and preparing them to be the workers for the future. So I think of every buzzword that people use, and every technology that folks talk about. I don't believe in technology for the sake of technology. It has to have a purpose tied into what we're trying to do for our organization. And there's a serious role that data and advanced analytics play in terms of how do you enable predictive analytics as it relates to the testing equipment that you have. It runs the gamut. So sharing not only the technologies, but the purpose and how you're using the technology, that's been an incredible sort of draw relative to talent.
I think that's very well said. I know, one of the most rewarding aspects of my role at EY is seeing great talent come into the emerging space and how they can dramatically transform lives. At EY, our purpose is building a better working world, and I often say our technologists are on the forefront of that and really connecting that. And what I've seen is the more that you can connect this talent that we're bringing in, connecting the technology with their personal purpose and having it align with our companies, that's when you get that trifecta of difference, if you will.
Absolutely.
Other thoughts around attracting and retaining talent that Casey or Sarah you'd like to share?
Well, I support everything you just said. We're obviously making greater use of technology in a variety of different ways. As you said, you can, I love the kind of analytics that you can use now to identify long lists in the recruitment process, not least because it does tend to drive a more diverse long list. You're not dependent on the people you know or the people recruiters know. You're likely to, if you kind of do this in a more scientific way, you're likely to reap a much broader set of potential candidates for any given role, so that's pretty cool. There's some pretty cool stuff I've seen in terms of kind of using blockchain to verify qualifications. More and more people are using that now. That's a sort of slow, messy part of the process. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways in which we're using technology now in that recruiting cycle itself, which is valuable. And then I back everything you say about the what retains people is more than ever purpose and how you can ensure people stay connected to that purpose, particularly in a kind of world where they're not often face-to-face with each other.
So if I may add, because I think it's really important, when we hear the term emerging technologies, folks tend to think of a certain generation that has access to that. And as a proud Gen Xer, middle-aged, non-digital native, I think it's really important that we all recognize that every person, every day, everywhere has the ability to engage in technology and emerging technology. So when I talk about, we have a strong early in career track, and you're pulling in that new thinking coming out of the university and early in their careers, but I'm looking at all of my folks who are mature, seasoned leaders in the experience that they have, and how do we then insert emerging technologies into what they do such that it unleashes something new and different and novel. So I often wanted to, talk about the fact that it's about all generations relative to emerging technologies, and not the notion that it's only the early in career folks who have insight on it.
Absolutely. And Sabina, maybe you can expand, you hit on two themes, I think, as we were talking about the attraction and retention of talent. One is accessibility. How do we democratize, make it accessible for all? And the other is around diversity. All different kinds of diversity. How do we make sure that that is pervasive and that we're building that accessibility and diversity in our workforce and the impact of technology?
So I'm going to rewind and hit play again. Intentionality. Right? When I think about having been in technology for over 25 years, and by the way, when I started, I was 10 coding in 2GL, so I've been at it a little longer than 25 years, maybe 26, right? But I do think that when we think about diversity, I think about it's all inclusive. One of the things that I shared with the panelists is I love the fact that it's an all-female panel, but I would love to see some men sitting on this stage as well around this particular topic because of the importance that it has in terms of human impact. But moreover, I would say, number one, when I look at diversity, it drives difference in thinking, it drives innovation, innovation drives new capabilities, new ideas, new ways of doing things, and it is a function of where we have to go. In our world, we seek to be as diverse as the communities that we live in, that we work in, that we serve. And that's a really important and critical part of how you function as an enterprise, I would say. And so I look at diversity not just on, classic dimensions of gender or race or other demographic designations, but it's more so about how do you drive different thinking. And so to Sarah's point, having that diversity allows you to drive to new outcomes, new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways you're looking at data. All of those dimensions play into it. So intentionality, you talked about the metrics for recruiting. You have to set the standard, you have to set the expectations, and you have to execute on that. So it's not just lip service.
I think it is important to think about diversity perhaps more broadly than people still have a tendency to do. I've been in, I'm sure all of us have, been in rooms where you have what looks like a very diverse group of people, in terms of gender and race and every other kind of measure, and they behave very homogeneously. It's fantastically true, and there's also people get to the top because of certain traits, certain ways of speaking, certain backgrounds, certain social status, and it's amazing how homogeneous the group can be. I think you have to constantly challenge yourself to think about the genuine diversity, and of course that requires, psychological safety and trust within the group of people that are around the table as well, for people to genuinely be having a broad, open dialogue, challenging positions, challenging biases. So it's a very complex field, diversity, and I think sometimes we're in danger of dumbing it down, to your point. So a big agenda for all of us.
Definitely. Speaking of broad, Casey, you all are tackling crises and conflicts all over the world, particularly for things that are affecting our children. How do you see technology sort of making a play in a fairer future?
Well, I think access to the internet, especially for young people, is the main barrier to allowing a digital future where everyone has opportunity, choice, access to information, and the ability to work and do a multitude of other things online. So I mentioned that we're working on Giga, which is trying to map all the schools in the world to the internet and actually get schools online and get children online so that we can then, build the future workforces for companies like yours. But I think what we're also, we also have to take care of the children now who do not have access. We know that mapping, mapping millions of schools in order to get them online is going to take a lot of time. And there are 1.2 billion children already right now that do not have access to the internet. So what about the children today that need access in order to gain access to education? Because we know things are going on in the world where children can't go to school. We've got wars. We've got, hunger prompted migration. We've got a growing refugee population. And we've got weather catastrophes, and this is causing millions of children to not be able to go to school on a daily basis. And if they don't have the internet at home, how are we taking care of these children, and how are they getting an education? So we partnered actually with Microsoft and launched in 2020, perfect timing. Well, we fast forwarded a little bit because of the pandemic, and we launched the Learning Passport. The Learning Passport is app and browser based so that kids can access it access their classes and curriculum when they do have access to the internet, download it, and then later fulfill their classes at home. And this allows, a local curriculum, it allows a multitude of languages, and so this is just showing the different ways of innovation partnering with the tech sector in order to close that digital divide. I'd be remiss, as we're talking about developing talent, to not also mention our African Drone and Data Academy as well. It's a partnership spearheaded with UNICEF across Africa. We're training the future tech leaders of Africa in drones and AI and how to use those for humanitarian purposes. And graduates are graduating and going on and becoming part of the tech sector and really remembering how best that they can use drones for humanitarian purposes. We can get faster information about rural communities. We can, deliver supplies faster. And so there's some really incredible emerging tech that's coming out of Africa as well. That hopefully, they're graduating, they're becoming part of companies, and they'll continue to help build the future that they want to be a part of.
Yes, Sarah.
I don't want to interrupt your flow of questions, but I'm just inspired by listening to Casey. There's one thing I just wanted to mention about, it's an initiative that's been kicked off by Thomson Reuters that I heard about a couple of weeks ago that really inspired me, so I just wanted to share it. So there's a group within Thomson Reuters called Thomson Reuters Special Services, based in Washington, and they do a lot around data and analytics in public sector, but they look at threats across the world. One of the things they look at is the threat from human trafficking. One of the observations they made a few months ago was that there was a radical increase, I think they were saying sort of 600% increase in specific targeting of particular communities for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And they could see a lot of data that showed that people were specifically targeting Ukrainian refugees, a lot of whom obviously are women and children and older populations, and people specifically searching for Ukrainian refugees and quite clearly intending with the intention of sexual exploitation. So they reached out to OSCE, and we've kicked off a campaign, to cut a long story short. It's called Be Safe, and it's a campaign to get information to these specific communities, to Ukrainian refugees who've landed in other countries, to help them to understand the nature of the threat against them and to help them to know how to get help. And it gives quite specific guidance about where to get help and support. So if I could make a small plug for them, because it is a fantastic initiative, if you can search for the Be Safe campaign and amplify it through your own channels, retweet it or share it or whatever, so that we can get information as much information as possible to this vulnerable community. But I think that's another example. I mean, it's like you're a hard act to follow, but
Yeah.
that's another example of where we can really kind of use our organizations for enormous good.
Thanks for sharing that. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a topic that I think is the defining topic of our generation, ESG. Every company is talking about it, and we often say at EY, it's everyone's business, right? Being in the business of ESG. Sarah, how is Thomson Reuters really looking and tackling the ESG arena?
Oof, that's another big question. I mean, I suppose there's two ways to answer that from a CIO seat. There's the stuff that we do, within tech to think about how we reduce our carbon footprint, and then there's the stuff we do as a tech organization to facilitate the broader organization's response to ESG. So, you know, I mean, all of you are doing this, I'm sure, so I won't go into the basics of it. Some observations about some of the things that I think are less obvious in our own work. So we're focusing every bit as much on end user compute as we are on the service, which I think hasn't always been intuitive for CIOs. And that's because there are more of them, you know, and typically we tend to, they tend to have a shorter lifespan than servers. And because I think we have tended to focus very much on energy consumption, you know, when a device is with us. It's the, what do they call it? I've forgotten the exact word. It's the third order as opposed to the second order consumptive effects. And with end user devices, an awful lot of the carbon consumption is in the manufacture, it's in the packaging, the logistics, the distribution, and then at the other end in the disposal, the decomposition, you know, recycling effects. About 3/4 of the carbon utilization is in those aspects. So they're sort of outside the organization. Scope 3, that's what, so Scope 3 emissions rather than Scope 2 emissions. So, but if you know, of course, you know, you don't have the luxury of just focusing on the stuff that's immediately in front of you. We are, as buyers, responsible for that entire consumptive pathway, and that's important for us to remember. And, you know, there are dead simple ways to affect that, obviously. You can reduce the number of devices per person, you can reduce extend the lifespan of devices with people. But I think the biggest lever we have in that is in the supply chain. So the way we source devices, you know, we are mandating the use of recyclable components. We're being quite specific about the expectations we have around the handling of the devices at the end of life, how they're disposed of, how they're recycled, etc. So I think, and all of us can do that. It's relatively straightforward. With our sourcing partners, we can push for, you know, a quite different set of responsibility in that whole process. On the server side, I mean, you know, I'm sure we're all doing various things to kind of try to make our own data centers more efficient. You can try and improve, you know, power efficiency quotients. You can
through UNICEF. We know it's much bigger than ourselves, so let's figure out a way to do it, whether it's with us or on your own. But thank you, and thanks for having me up here.
Great. So I will answer the question across a few dimensions. The first one is, in my current role at Abbott, Abbott's been around, as I shared, for over 130 years. And having been a former runner, I would say I think of it like a relay race, in that someone handed me the baton. And so for the duration that I run my leg of this race, that I would have advanced Abbott's legacy into the 21st century, inclusive of modernization, inclusive of digitization, and certainly of its products as well as the enterprise. And I would also say, you know, outside of that, I'm the mother of 2 girls, 12 and 6. And as an African-American female, I want to be a role model, not just for them, but for every young person that, as I am, an immigrant to the United States, every kid that's in one of those countries that you said is not currently connected, that they have a recognition that you can boldly go out, you can boldly pursue your dreams. But also, for me here in the United States, I want people to see leadership differently. So to your point, Sarah, about sort of that homogeneous dimension, even if people look different physically, it's about being able to demonstrate that leadership can look different, and that if any way that I am able to allow other people to fulfill and unleash their full potential as part of my legacy, that would be one well received, so that my daughters, quite frankly, get to do whatever they want in this world without folks having to put any designations on them.
Inspiring. Sarah, what about you?
Well, I mean, I guess like everyone in the room probably, I mean, you want to leave a technical estate in a better place than you inherited, so you want it to be kind of functionally richer and safer, more secure, lower risk, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, I mean, I do think that the thing that you always come back to, as these guys have, is the people. And that's the, you know, what matters most to me is that the people who've worked in the organization, you know, leave better able to lead technology wherever they go next. And that's, you know, in terms of the way we've taught them to actually do the discipline of technology, to operate as engineers, but I think even more important in terms of their sense of responsibility and in terms of the focus and the attention they give to technology as a force for good in whatever they do next.
If I could add one thing I just thought about. So in the lexicon, for those in an enterprise, we often say, we call it the business. We're IT and there's the business. I want to change that lexicon to recognize that technology is the business in every domain in the 21st century. So if I can just make it where our people in IT no longer talk about the business and recognize that we are the business, that I think would be even icing on the cake of what I shared before.
That's fantastic. You stole my thunder a bit, because that would be mine as well, is that instead of talking about it as 2 entities, the business and technology, recognize that all together we are better, right? And that it's not IT and technology, we are the business, and the business is us, and the business is technology, in a way. So, well, thank you very much for your time. It's been a really inspiring panel, I know for me, and I hope for our audience members as well, both in the room and all over the world. And look forward to the next session. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay,
One more time.
Let's focus on intentionality today, set the standard, set the expectation, and encourage diversity of thought in the room and online today. That means getting onto Slido, asking the questions you need to ask. Next up, we have a conversation from Spotify's Tyson Singer and Priyanka Sharma from Cloud Native Computing Foundation on why investing in open source should be a top priority. Please welcome them to the stage.
All right, okay. Return to the Mac. Get up what it is, what it does, what it is, what it isn't. Looking for a better way to get up out of bed instead of getting on the internet and checking a new hit. Me get up, first shot, come strut walking. A little bit of humble, a little bit of cautious. Somewhere between like Rocky and Cosby's for the game. Nope, nope, y'all can't copy it.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Tyson. Nice
Hi.
to see you again.
Likewise. Yes, nice to see you as well. I see that I need to vary my wardrobe a little bit. I'm wearing the exact same shirt as that one. How embarrassing.
Hey, if it works. Awesome. Well, hello and welcome, everybody. I am Priyanka Sharma, as the picture says, and I'm the Executive Director of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF. Just so you have a little bit of context on that, we're the home for 140 plus open source projects that form the backbone of modern day computing and infrastructure. So web scale companies from the likes of Google to Spotify to Airbnb, Citibank, they all rely on CNCF hosted software for their business critical applications. So needless to say, I spend a lot of my time speaking with technology leaders about open source, about how it fits into their business. And it's one of the best parts of my job. One such technology leader is right here with me today, Tyson. Tyson Singer is the VP of Technology and Platforms at Spotify. Tyson, intro about yourself to everyone.
Well, thank you, Priyanka. It's great to be here and to be on stage with yourself and talk about this important subject. But a little bit about me. I have a few different roles at Spotify. So first and foremost, I lead our technology infrastructure teams at Spotify. So that means that I'm responsible for ensuring that as our business grows and gets more complex, it continues to scale effectively, reliably, that we manage our costs, that we manage actually our carbon footprint as well, on top of a world-class technology platform. One of my other roles, which I'm very passionate about, is ensuring that every developer at Spotify is as happy and productive as possible. And then finally, I'm responsible for our overall technology strategy at Spotify.
So, like, chill job is what I'm hearing.
Chill job. We have great people, so plenty people can help me out on that.
Awesome, awesome. So I think Spotify knows this so well, and many companies are starting to realize just how it's impossible to innovate at scale today without relying on open source software. Free, publicly available source code is really like the scaffolding of the digital society today.
Indeed.
So I know Spotify has been really passionate about open source, and you've looked for opportunities over the years to contribute. And now you have this great moment, well, from my perspective, where Backstage has become incubating project in CNCF.
Yep.
So there's a lot going on. Why don't you share with the audience Spotify's open source journey and what changed along the way?
Yeah, so Spotify is not very old of a company. We're about 15 years old, and we started providing both contributions and our own projects to open source pretty much immediately. But it turns out that passion is actually not enough to be successful in the open source space. So about 5 years ago, I switched over from leading our consumer-facing experience technology teams to my current role, leading our infrastructure and platform. And I took with me some lessons from the C2B side of our business, and I had also been looking at how enterprise software companies operate. And one of the important things that I saw going on in both of those cases was a much higher investment in product management for how you do software development. And so we changed the ratio of product managers in my organization, really increased it so that we could be more customer-centric. So why am I talking about this? I thought you were talking about open source. Well, it turns out that this has had a really positive impact on how we do open source software as well. So there's a little bit of this myth that all open source is done by this sort of lone developer out there who contributes everything. And sometimes that's true. We have those projects as well at Spotify. But what we really see is most effective in our open source products is that they're built by teams. And those teams are really led by our product managers, our infrastructure product managers in particular, who know how to connect with the problems their customers are having. And so those customers now are no longer just other Spotifyers in our ecosystem, but really developers across the entire world. So that ended up being quite an impactful decision for how we approached open source as well. One of the other patterns that I saw, which was really impactful, was that we needed to have a product marketing function inside of my infrastructure organization. I still get weird looks from folks when I tell them I have a product marketing function that's focused internally. But Spotify is a very special place. It's got a very special culture. People are very independent. And so we have to convince them to adopt the different things that we're trying to nudge people towards. We're trying to defragment our technology ecosystem. And so being able to tell stories effectively is really, really important. And so we did that internally, but it turns out that that has been a super important factor in the success of our open source products. So you can build it, and they might come, but it's a lot more likely they'll come if you can articulate very clearly what the problem statement is, tell a good story around that, and do branding around it. So we had this recent project that we open source called Soundboard. And a few engineers working on this, they were going to come up with their own logo and go out there. And I said, hey, just take a second, talk to our product marketing team. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. This is so much better. And it's a great product, but I do think that the marketing aspect is really important to draw people in so that they understand the value proposition that you're providing.
Absolutely. I think product involvement, whether it's product management or product marketing, professionalizes open source.
Yeah.
And given how critical it is today, that's where the need is.
So sort of taking it to the next level of professionalism, which we do think is really important, we started an open source program office, our OSPO, a few years back as well. And this has really helped us think about how to run open source projects both internally and how to engage externally. So it helps us in how we engage with all the different foundations out there for open source. So we certainly engage with your organization because it is the premier open source organization. We also have an advisory role for the EU Linux Foundation, and we're contributing to the Mobile Native Foundation and this new open source security foundation, which I think is a really important one for all of us to invest in going forward.
Absolutely. I think your investment spreads far and wide with folks, dollars, everything.
I mean, we all benefit from it, so
yeah.
yes.
It's like, you know, when you invest in this pie, the pie just gets bigger. It's not zero sum. So I think we've touched upon the importance of open source, how it's business critical today. But given you know, its unique origins and how it's structured, the question of open source sustainability keeps coming up. Especially in the current economic climate, I get questions around it. Yeah. I'd love to hear about Spotify's focus on open source sustainability. Maybe describe a little bit of how you define it and go from there.
Yeah, so in terms of the importance of sustainability and why it's more of a focus today, I think if you're paying attention to what's going on in the open source ecosystem that is really providing an infrastructure for all of our companies to succeed and to innovate, it's starting to show some cracks. So there have been some very spectacular cases of maintainer burnout that have popped up in the press recently. You can see that folks are disengaging a little bit more, and the result of that is that you're seeing more and more security vulnerabilities popping up in open source software. But there's another aspect of sustainability which is really important for Spotify, and I think it's important for a lot of us, is that the way that you get innovation inside of any ecosystem is to have a more diverse workforce. And we're seeing that in the open source space, there really isn't a very diverse workforce contributing to that. And so I think we're missing out on a lot of potential innovation in that space because we don't have a more sustainable model for inclusion of people into the open source ecosystem. So that's sort of how we think about sustainability from a problem perspective.
Right.
From a solution perspective, we have 3 different approaches that we engage on to help address the challenge. One is to invest with money. 2 is to invest in the open source ecosystem with time. And third is to help establish new business models around open source. So if we start with the first one, investing with money, seems like the simplest one, but it's maybe not as simple as you might think. So we're seeing this burnout that's going on in the open source ecosystem. We see also this lack of diversity. So if you look at the statistics, you can see that most of the time that happens on open source software is done outside of working hours. And you can also look at the demographics of who contributes to that. It tends to be young men, because they're the ones who can afford to stay up all night coding. And other people who are very creative developers in the ecosystem may not be able to do that. And so by providing funding into the ecosystem, we believe that we can allow people to actually work during sort of working hours on open source work. So we have started a pilot program, our open source fund, which we just seeded with $100,000 to test out our hypothesis here that by funding more independent open source projects, we're able to have a meaningful impact on the quality and health of those projects going forward. So we're going to test this out for a while, but I am super, super optimistic that this is going to really work, and then we can expand our investment going forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. The cloud native ecosystem, as you know, is very much professionalized open source because the projects in our portfolio form the products for many companies.
Yes.
And so we're seeing more and more of your full-time job includes a percentage of time. I think y'all are great examples of that, as I know you're going to talk about.
Yes.
But I can definitely attest to the fact that baking open source into somebody's paid repertoire just changes the game completely.
Yeah, so that gets to our second approach, which is investing with time. We believe that it's very important to recognize the contributions of open source because we benefit it as a company, other companies benefit from it. And so providing that recognition also and providing the time and space to work on open source during your working hours is very important. And so we've added a new metric to all of our projects internally, which is the amount of time that the contributions come in during working hours and come in outside of working hours. And our aspiration is that for all of our open source projects, the ratio is the same as our internal projects.
Nice.
And that'll be a good indicator that we are actually investing in a sustainable way that allows everybody to participate in the open source ecosystem.
That is really impressive. I think a key point for folks to take away is when you think of open source software and contributing to it, it benefits a wider group of people, but at the same time, you need to do it for yourself because it's part of your technology stack. Improvements that people make, they need to make them. So I love the direction Spotify has taken, and I think more and more end user companies going that route will just strengthen open source, strengthen people's products and technology, and just be a win-win for everyone. So there was the third thing you mentioned, there was open source business models. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we think that there is a new pathway for companies to create businesses around open source that is different than the traditional sort of get a VC to fund your open source project, turn it into a commercial approach. So we aspire.
Nothing wrong with that?
Nothing wrong with that. No, that's a successful pattern, of course, quite good. But we think that there should be more opportunity for all types of companies to open up access to their non-core technologies and benefit in a commercial approach from that. So the way that Spotify is starting our journey on that is we have a project called Backstage. It's a developer portal. And in 2020, we contributed to this foundation you may have heard of, yes, CNCF. It is the foundation that you want to contribute to if you want your open source to be adopted and become an industry standard. So we open sourced it, we donated it to the CNCF, and the goal there was really to ensure that lots of people adopted that, because at Spotify, everything we do in our product development ecosystem is tied back into Backstage. We have all these plugins that tie into it and make our ecosystem more effective. And So that was sort of stage one, which was to get Backstage out there as an industry standard. And that's been going really well. We've seen adoption really, really take off.
One of the star projects. So
yes, it's
really
doing well. So the next stage that we think is important is to create a commercial ecosystem around that, because that will allow more folks to participate in that ecosystem and benefit from that. So we expect that we'll be able to sort of establish this model in the business community as something that other businesses can do. We're not going to say too much about it today, but we'll be saying a little bit more about it later this year. So hopefully you will all stay tuned to find out more about this new model that we're thinking about, and hopefully other companies will be able to follow.
Awesome. I think that's so exciting because, as you said, there's traditionally been seen this one way to participate in open source monetization, which is get a VC to back you and your project.
Yep.
But this way, end users are folks we define who consume the latest and greatest infrastructure technologies. And those folks, such as Spotify, this is thinking really outside the box, and everyone can participate in the boom that's happening with open source-led businesses. So I think that also will, more people following your lead will probably enmesh open source more deeply into the business of every company. I think the previous panel, they were saying we don't want IT and business to be separated. And I totally agree, because every company is a technology company. And initiatives such as these, I think, really bake it into companies' fabrics.
Yeah, and I should go back to emphasize the importance of open sourcing things in this ecosystem, because it really does create the foundation of trust for the overall context, because you know that there is this sustained investment that a company and a broader community is going to make into the space, and so it builds a lot of trust for how to go forward.
Absolutely, and it's not a single point of failure.
Yes.
One vendor can't be like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yes.
It's a group, so absolutely. So just briefly, I think it'll be helpful for the folks here to learn more about Backstage. Why don't you tell us?
Yeah, so despite its very sort of clever music sounding name, it doesn't have anything to do with our core music business or our core audio streaming business. It's really addressing something that is very universal for all digital dependent companies, and that is how you address complexity. So these days, if you are developing software, you're dealing with a tremendous amount of complexity, and that is really slowing down your work as a developer, your product development, and therefore your company overall. And so if you're at a small company or even a large company, your developers are struggling with lots of things. They have to monitor their systems, react to alerts, they have to make sure it's secure software, they have to deal with all the different cloud ecosystems they have, the cloud consoles, they have to scale up Kubernetes, they have to manage their data pipelines, they have to manage their ML pipelines, they have to manage their mobile code bases and their components. I can go on and on. There's all these different sorts of things that they're managing. And so with Backstage, our goal is to help minimize that complexity so that as an engineer, we've really figured out how to streamline your workflows, make it easier to share your knowledge across to the company and with your peers, and really take a lot of that messy stuff that's going on in the infrastructure space and streamline that. And so, that's effectively what Backstage is. And as I mentioned before, we have this overall sort of plug-in ecosystem that surrounds Backstage, which allows people to customize it and reuse some of those customizations across industries. And that's what really makes it powerful as a platform and as a product. So we have this sort of basic idea that happy developers make happy code. And for Backstage, for Spotify, Backstage is really the key to living up to that idea. And by open sourcing it, we have allowed other people to take advantage of that same set of ideas and that innovation so that they can do what they're really primary focus is, which is to create innovation for whoever their customers are. So for Spotify, we use this so that we can really innovate for our fans and our creator base, because that's what's really important for us. And so having projects like Backstage in the open source ecosystem that are infrastructure that all companies can use, we think really can lift up innovation everywhere.
Absolutely. So it being a plugin based model, people can extend it as needed, right?
Yes.
So I think that customizability is really awesome because as I'm sure folks in this room understand, with the growing complexity with infrastructure, which happens if you have more than 2 developer teams, you probably have sprawl, complexity,
Yes.
who's using what. This seems like a great way, well, I know it is a great way to bring in the information and help people. It probably helps onboarding engineers much faster.
It does. That's one of the many metrics that we track at Spotify.
Yeah.
And we have seen our onboarding time really compress as we invested into this overall ecosystem.
So if y'all haven't checked out Backstage yet, go talk to your developer teams. They've probably already heard of it, and it might end up giving you a boost in developer productivity. Awesome, awesome. This was really cool to share with the audience your thinking, how Spotify looks at open source, sustainability, and of course, our favorite Backstage. So this has been a good conversation for me. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience that they should take away from today?
Yeah, I'll just go back to those 3 things around how important it is and how you can go about supporting the open source ecosystem because your company is dependent on it. Think about what are the models that work for your company to either fund open source through money, time, or to develop a new business on top of that. Yeah. And we'll share more about that later.
One of the places they'll share a little bit more is the upcoming KubeCon Cloud Native Con conference in Detroit in a couple of weeks. It's the largest open source conference in the world. CNCF hosts it. Backstage folks will be there. So highly encourage you to send your developer teams, come yourself, and check out this cloud native open source ecosystem. All right, thank you so much, Tyson, for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, as always. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Music is a world within itself, with a language we all understand.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tyson. Thanks, Priyanka. Tyson was one of the first speaker calls we actually had for this event, so it's brilliant to see you on stage, and we're looking forward to that announcement later this year. We're now going to head into our first networking break. So for the tech leaders here in Austin, please head on into the networking lounge next door for tea, coffee, and refreshments. And join us back in the conference room here at 10:50. We'll be hearing from Ajay Singh on how to achieve sustainability goals while growing your business and managing data growth, followed by the Smart Biosphere panel, a fireside chat with the Chief Digital and Technology Officer at CBRE, and our first editorial panel hosted by Jeffrey Daston, our technology correspondent. And to the millions watching via the global broadcast, you'll be viewing the 30-minute package from the editorial team at Reuters. We'll be live again at 10:50 a.m. Central Time. I'll see you all soon.
Bring the action.
When you hear this in the club, you gotta turn it up. You gotta turn it up. You gotta turn it up. When we up in the club, all eyes on us. All eyes on us. All eyes on us. See the boys in the club, they watching us. They watching us. They watching us. Everybody in the club, all eyes on us. All eyes.
Scream and shout and let it all out. And scream and shout and let it out. We saying oh, we oh, we oh, we oh.
You are now.
Bring the action.
Rock and roll, everybody let's lose control. All the bottom, we let it go. Going fast, we ain't going slow. No, no, hey, yo. Hear the beat, now let's hit the flow. Drink it up and then drink some more. Light it up and let's let it blow, blow, blow. Hey, yo. Rock it out, rockin' out. If you know what we talking about. Burn it up and burn down the house, house. Hey, yo. Turn it up and don't turn it down. Here we go shake the ground. Cause everywhere that we go, we
Bring the action.
When you hear this in the club, you gotta turn it up. You gotta turn it up. You gotta turn it up. When we up in the club, all eyes on us. All eyes on us. All eyes on us.
You see them girls in the club, they looking at us. They looking at us. They looking at us.
Everybody in the club, all eyes on us. All eyes on us. All eyes on us.
I wanna scream and shout and let it all out. And scream and shout and let it out. We saying oh, we oh, we oh, we oh. We saying oh, we oh, we oh, we oh. I wanna scream and shout and let it all out. And scream and shout and let it out. We saying oh, we oh, we oh, we oh.
You are now rocking with
yeah. It goes on and on.
It's assisting the surgical team in removing a cancerous
refreshing break. I'm sure a few of you noticed that there were some conversations happening in the meeting zone to the left as you enter the networking lounge. These were all set via the Reuters Events app. So if you're yet to log in, this is your cue to do so. There's some truly incredible leaders here today, so do jump on that app and start connecting. Next up, our bronze sponsor, Pure Storage, will be presenting on how to achieve sustainability goals while growing your business and managing data growth. Please welcome to the stage, Ajay Singh.
Hello, I'm Ajay Singh, Chief Product Officer at Pure Storage. And I have seen the explosion of data and its impact grow. As fellow innovators, we are all motivated by the desire to solve complex problems, particularly using data insights as we drive and strive to get a competitive edge in the digital transformation. And to do that, we make technology faster, scalable, smarter, but we also need to make technology sustainable. And these goals are not at odds with each other. We can drive progress and speed and insights into data, but at the same time, we can also make it sustainable. In fact, we are building sustainable models for the future with data storage, with significantly lower power, lower cooling, and far less waste, overall reducing emissions for global data centers. At the World Economic Forum, several corporate leaders expressed a strong sentiment towards sustainability. In fact, they all recognize the need to take proactive steps to reduce carbon was really a responsibility, but also a source of competitive advantage, as we could drive lower cost, meet customer needs, and also aid in the attracting of talent to the organization. But with no end in sight to this growth of data, the need to drive data insights, data centers are increasingly going to play a bigger and bigger role in any corporate sustainability strategy. So data and data insights today play a fairly fundamental role in driving new products and services. You hear about all these great machine learning algorithms against structured and unstructured data, getting unique insights and ahas to product managers as they better understand customer needs and get an edge in the marketplace. But these same data centers use a tremendous amount of power, from racks and racks of spinning disk, servers, network devices, backup and disaster recovery, business processes operating. And with so much data, ultimately this data has to be stored someplace. In fact, the total data storage projected in the 2025 timeframe is set to exceed 200 zettabytes. That is 200 billion terabytes. And so with all that data, literally every person in the developed world is interacting with some data service or the other every 18 seconds. And as more and more people enter the developed world, you can imagine the desire to interact is only going up, thereby driving this explosive growth in data centers. So we need to address the power consumption of data centers. Today, according to the International Energy Agency, data centers consume roughly 1% of global electricity consumption. And yet, this energy consumption is actually limiting the growth of data centers. There are several jurisdictions that have said, sorry, we can't handle any more data centers. We just don't have the power to do it. For example, recently Ireland, there was a lot in the news about saying, we can't really handle more global data centers in Ireland anymore. And they're trying to figure out how to work around it because they just don't have the power to be able to do it. Pure believes that data success hinges on energy efficiency. All data centers must be optimized for power, cooling, and space if we have to avoid a costly, high-emission future. This means leveraging data storage technology that not only meets the performance and capacity requirements, but also delivers energy and emission savings. Pure is focused on helping customers make smarter decisions through data insights at the lowest wattage and space required. In fact, the more we saw the disruption in the energy markets and the explosive growth of data, we felt there was a need to help our customers decrease carbon footprints as they advance in the digital transformation. When it comes to sustainability, legacy storage systems are challenged. Traditional data center architects tend to get a mishmash of spinning disk, hybrid arrays, all-flash arrays across low-end systems, mid-end systems, high-end systems, and all of that requiring a lot of operations on workload placement and scheduling typically makes it for a fairly inefficient operation. Even now, corporate data centers are optimized for reliability and performance rather than efficiency. Pure has had a big focus on efficiency, optimizing performance per watt with unmatched storage densities. How efficient? 1/5 the power consumed by another all-flash system. And how dense? 1/10 the density or the space required for the same storage systems. And we pull that off through solid-state technologies. That means our data storage systems take less space, while at the same time reducing power requirements even more. We've also recognized that it's not only all about designing systems intentionally, but also how you service those systems. And we've come up with this notion of a non-disruptive upgrade, where through a combination of hardware and software, we sense at a customer location when a part is coming up towards the end of its life. And then we can non-disruptively, without any migration, just only replace those components, thereby extending the life of these components. What that means is we spare customers the unnecessary product replacements that are and the associated e-waste with that. So let's explore 3 specific actions for enterprises assessing their own environmental impact. First, a materiality assessment. A materiality assessment is a formal exercise to engage stakeholders and find out how important specific ESG concerns are to them. This helps identify key priority areas that are intersecting stakeholder engagement with business success. At Pure, our assessment, while we looked at all the stakeholder requirements, our assessment really helped us focus in on those areas where we could drive the biggest impact on the environment. And for us, it was our products and our services, because that's what generates the most in the environment. The second is developing a as-a-service approach, leveraging third parties. Our view is that as-a-service is all about buying outcomes with SLAs. And so somebody mentioned, using cloud services. That's a great example of using as-a-service approaches, because you can start small, and then you can grow and have transparency with your pricing. And so you're not setting up systems that are up, ready for service, but not being used, thereby consuming a lot of energy. That means you can work with partners that can flex capacity, that meets your needs, without standing up systems that are not being used or doing rip and replace upgrades. At Pure, with our Evergreen One subscription, we offer that capability to customers where they can buy as they consume, and systems are not stood up when they're really not being used. So that avoids having either underutilized or over-provisioned systems. So as a service is another great way to push your sustainability objectives. The third way is to think about optimizing your supply chain end-to-end by recycling packaging, eliminating packaging waste, choosing sustainable supplier networks, and adopting quality-driven manufacturing processes. Because ultimately, a supply chain designed to be responsive and diverse can handle surges in demand. So you want that from a business standpoint. But at the same time, you want to make sure that your supply chain has a lot of sustainability elements in it. At Pure, we have a global supply chain that, while ensuring ethical treatment of workers, it is also environmentally sound and driving environmentally sound practices. Finally, it's important that while, yes, data centers may be where we recommend you start to think about a sustainability effort, but you also want to make sure that these sustainability principles go deep in your corporate ethos on how you fundamentally design your products. And in this area, we recommend two areas: how you design your products and how you perform your customer service, because that's where you have the biggest impact in your customer base. And this is good business reasons to focus on your products and your services, because that's where the puck is skating. By 2070, proactive action on climate could add up to $3 trillion to the US market alone. So it's a great opportunity to build products and services that are sustainable. In fact, 80% of the companies today are reporting sustainability, up from 13% in 1993. And even financial institutions are noting this, because assets under ESG funds grew to $330 billion in 2021. And sustainability and climate change is affecting all of us. 80% of corporate leaders today say they've been impacted by some climate change event. So definitely where the puck is going, worth the investment. And so what that means is designing sustainable products and services. We feel there's a big payoff for that. For us, in our case, we realized that linking hardware and software really would contribute to sustainability, because through our software linkage, we can figure out when our hardware at a customer site is likely going to fail, and we replace it just in time, so we can extend the life as much as possible. So if you manufacture anything, probably your products are the biggest contributors to e-waste in the marketplace. So our advice is to strive to be the best economic and environmental partner to your customers with very intentional, sustainable designs. Think about the ways to promote repair, reuse of products, extend service lifetimes of the products. We did the same at Pure, and our design was very intentional to drive 1/5 the power, 1/10 the space with this non-disruptive upgrade process that we talked about from a service standpoint. So in closing, this year's spike in energy prices is delivering certainly pain at the pump and inflationary pressures that we all of us face, but this is also complicating our rising climate change vulnerabilities that comes with our increasing reliance on fossil fuels. We can rise to the occasion and innovate to build sustainable model for the future with data storage, designed and engineered to require lower power, lower cooling, and far less e-waste, thereby reducing global data center carbon emissions. Sustainability and carbon neutrality are too important to ignore. We can all be proud of the steps we are taking